The rain had come down hard, casting the streets in a blur of gray and silver as the wipers on David Taylor's old truck scraped frantically across the windshield. He glanced at his rearview mirror. Emma and Lily, his 2 young daughters, were huddled together in the back seat, whispering excitedly about their weekend trip. David smiled, a soft chuckle escaping him as he saw Lily trying to convince Emma to share her candy. It was a moment of peace amidst the chaos of being a single dad. Suddenly, the screech of tires ripped through the air. His heart lurched as he saw the flash of headlights swerving, the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against concrete. Before he could react, there was a loud thud, and a luxury car, a sleek black Mercedes, spun out of control, flipping onto its roof with a sickening crunch. David slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding to a halt. He turned to his daughters, his voice steady but urgent. "Stay in the truck, girls. Don't move." Grabbing his jacket, he pushed the door open and bolted into the downpour. David Taylor wasn't a superhero. He didn't wear a cape or possess extraordinary abilities. He was a regular guy, a mechanic, a father, a man who lived paycheck to paycheck, doing his best to give his 2 daughters the life they deserved, despite the weight of the world on his shoulders. Raising Emma and Lily alone had never been easy. Emma, the older of the 2, was a sharp, compassionate 7-year-old with a wisdom that sometimes seemed too old for her age. Lily, only 5, was the firecracker, curious, full of life, and always asking questions that left David fumbling for answers. But no matter how tough life got, David always tried to keep things light, tried to shield them from the harsh realities of their world. He kept their days filled with laughter and adventure, even if that meant fixing broken-down cars in their modest garage on a rainy weekend instead of going to Disneyland. It was the life they had, and somehow they made it work. Yet, deep down, David struggled. He had dreams, big ones that could give his daughters a better future, but they always felt just out of reach. It wasn't just the lack of money that held him back. It was the relentless, gnawing fear that he wasn't enough for them, that he couldn't give them the world they deserved. But tonight, all those fears would be put aside, because there was someone else out there who needed help, someone whose life would soon be in David's hands. As David sprinted through the rain, the thudding of his heart matched the frantic rhythm of his boots splashing through the wet pavement. The wreckage of the car lay before him, a twisted mess of metal and glass. He could hear soft groaning from inside, the unmistakable sound of someone in pain. He approached cautiously, reaching for the door of the car. The rain hammered down harder, soaking him through, but there was no time to lose. Inside, he saw a woman, her face pale, blood trickling from her forehead. Her clothes were designer, expensive. A millionaire, he thought briefly, his mind racing. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that she needed him. "Hey," he called out gently, kneeling beside the car. "I'm here to help you. You're going to be okay." The woman's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her face before recognition seemed to set in. Her lips parted, but no words came out. David could hear her shallow breathing, and that was enough to make his decision. "Stay with me," he urged, his hand steady as he carefully unbuckled her seatbelt. "We're going to get you out of here." It wasn't easy. The door was jammed, and the car was unstable, its position precarious on the roof. But David didn't hesitate. He lifted her gently, using all his strength to drag her out of the wreckage. It took everything he had, his muscles burning, his hands slipping in the rain-soaked fabric of her clothes. Finally, with a burst of effort, David pulled her clear of the car, her limp body draped across his arms. He staggered backward, heart hammering in his chest. The woman's face was now pressed into his chest, her breath shallow but steady. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. He took a deep breath and made his way back to the truck, where Emma and Lily were waiting, their faces pressed to the windows. "Daddy, is she okay?" Emma asked in a small voice, her eyes wide with concern. David didn't answer right away. He couldn't. There was too much emotion clogging his throat. Instead, he gently placed the woman on the back seat. "She will be," he said softly, "but right now we need to get her help." Sophia Collins had everything she could ever want: money, status, a career that most people could only dream of. She was the head of her own multi-million-dollar investment firm, a woman who had built her empire from the ground up with grit and intelligence. But there was a darkness she couldn't escape, a loneliness that clung to her no matter how successful she became. Her family had long since drifted away, and her friends had proven to be nothing more than temporary distractions. Sophia's independence had always been her greatest strength, but in the wake of this accident, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: vulnerability. She had no control. She was at the mercy of the man who had pulled her from the wreckage, the man whose rough hands had steadied her when she was sure she was about to lose everything. David. Sophia had no idea who he was or why he had chosen to stop and help. But one thing was for sure: she owed him her life. Sophia's recovery was slow, but she was grateful. Grateful for David's selflessness, for his calmness in the face of danger, for the way he hadn't hesitated to risk his own safety to save her. But what had started as gratitude soon morphed into something deeper: a connection. David's life was simpler than hers, his priorities rooted in the love he had for his daughters. He didn't care about her wealth or status, and that was a breath of fresh air for someone like Sophia, who had spent her life being judged by her success. They began talking more, and as the days passed, Sophia found herself opening up to him about her fears and dreams in a way she hadn't done with anyone in years. And David, despite his tough exterior, began to trust her. But there was still one thing standing between them: David's pride. Sophia could offer him everything: money, connections, opportunities, but David wasn't sure he was ready to accept it. Could he let go of his pride and accept help from the very woman he had saved? As the days turned into weeks, David found himself wrestling with a feeling he didn't often entertain: pride. He had always prided himself on being able to stand on his own 2 feet, to provide for his daughters without the help of anyone. The idea of relying on Sophia, even after she had saved his life in the accident, made his stomach churn. Sophia had insisted on helping him countless times. "David," she said one evening, as they sat across from each other in the small kitchen of his modest home, "you've been helping people your entire life. Let me help you. You've earned it." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had spent hours repairing cars for people who couldn't afford to pay him, just to keep food on the table for Emma and Lily. But Sophia's offer felt different. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about success, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of change. "I'm not some charity case," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Sophia's eyes softened. "I never said you were," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've got talent, and I've got the resources to help you make something of it. Think about it, David." David glanced at the 2 little girls playing in the living room, Emma carefully reading a book, while Lily tried her best to keep her toys in line. They deserved more than what he could give them, and deep down, he knew it. But was it worth risking his pride? Was it worth accepting help from someone like Sophia? One late afternoon, just as the sun began to set, Sophia paid David a visit at his garage. David was fixing a car, the smell of oil and grease thick in the air. His hands were covered in dirt, and his old boots were worn from years of hard work. He heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up, but it wasn't just any car. It was Sophia's Mercedes, the same one that had been totaled that fateful night. Sophia stepped out, a faint smile on her lips. She was impeccably dressed, as always, but there was something softer in the way she looked at David now, something that made him feel less like a mechanic and more like a man. "I've been thinking," she began, her tone hesitant, "about how I can help you, not just with business, but with everything. You're a good man, David. You just need the right opportunity." David wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze fixed on the car in front of him. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. He felt a knot form in his chest, the familiar sensation of fear and uncertainty creeping in. "I don't know what to say, Sophia," he finally admitted, his voice rough. "I've never been the kind of man who asks for help. I've always had to do it on my own." Sophia walked closer, her voice soft but steady. "And I respect that. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. Let me be part of your journey, David." There was a long pause as David looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. He saw beyond the wealth, beyond the power, and he saw a woman who, despite her success, was just as vulnerable as he was. David finally spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "Okay, I'll accept your help, but only if you promise me one thing." Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" "You let me build this on my own. I'll take the opportunity, but it's going to be my way. I'm not going to let anyone do it for me." Sophia smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up her eyes. "You've got it." 1 year later, David stood in front of his newly renovated garage, watching as the sun set over the horizon. The business was thriving, his daughters were happy, and the weight he had carried for so long seemed a little less heavy now. Sophia approached him, her voice warm as she spoke. "I knew you could do it, David." David turned to her, a smile on his face. "I couldn't have done it without you." Sophia stepped closer, her hand brushing his gently. "And you wouldn't have asked for help if you hadn't been willing to trust me. That's what made the difference." For the first time in a long time, David felt like he had everything he needed. Not just the business, not just the success, but the love and respect of those around him, especially Sophia. The two of them stood there, in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that no matter where life took them next, they had found something rare: trust, partnership, and a love built on understanding. As they turned to walk back inside, hand in hand, David realized that he had finally found the balance he had been searching for, not just in business, but in life. Just as David began to feel the weight lifting from his shoulders, an unexpected challenge arose. The success of his garage had caught the attention of a powerful local competitor, Benson Motors, a well-established family business with deep pockets and connections. David had managed to carve out a niche for himself, building relationships with high-end clients, but he had never expected to face a threat this soon. It all began with an offer from Benson Motors. The patriarch of the company, Graham Benson, a man in his late 60s with a reputation for ruthless business tactics, called David one afternoon. "David Taylor, I've been hearing good things about you." Graham's voice crackled through the phone. "You've done well for yourself, I must say, but you know, there's room for everyone at the top. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement." David's hand tightened on the phone as he listened. He had heard rumors about Benson Motors before, about the way they had pushed out smaller competitors, the underhanded tactics they used to get ahead. This wasn't an offer, it was an ultimatum. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Benson?" David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm suggesting that you sell your business to me," Graham replied smoothly. "For a fair price, of course. But I think it's in your best interest to consider my offer. There's no shame in selling out, David. After all, a man has to know when to fold, right?" David felt a cold rush of anger, but he bit it back. "I'm not interested in selling." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Graham spoke again, his tone turning colder. "You should think about it. You won't get far in this business without the right connections. And if you refuse, well, you'll find yourself struggling to keep up. There are other ways of doing business, you know." David hung up the phone, his heart racing. He had always known the risks of running his own business, but this felt different. Graham wasn't just offering to buy him out. He was threatening to destroy everything David had worked for. David didn't know where to turn. The threat from Benson Motors was far from empty. Graham Benson was known for his aggressive tactics, and David had heard stories of businesses that had been crushed under his heel. He didn't want to get Emma and Lily involved in the stress of it all, but he had no choice. Sophia noticed the change in him immediately. They were meeting at their usual cafe, a small place by the river where they could sit and talk without distractions. David hadn't smiled once that day, and she knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Sophia asked, her voice soft but sharp with concern. David leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "It's Benson Motors. They want to buy me out, and it's not just an offer. They're threatening to put me out of business if I don't sell." Sophia's expression hardened. "Benson? He's known for playing dirty. You know that, don't you?" David nodded, his fists clenched. "I can't let him take this from me, Sophia. This business, it's everything. It's my chance to give Emma and Lily a better life. I can't just hand it over." Sophia studied him for a moment before speaking. "David, listen to me. You don't have to do this alone. You've already come so far on your own, but you don't have to fight this battle without help. I know people. I can make calls, pull strings, and get you the connections you need to fight back, but only if you're willing to take that step." David looked at her, torn. He wanted to believe in her, in the idea of her help, but something inside him still resisted. His pride, his sense of independence, screamed at him to fight this alone. "I can't just accept help like that," he muttered, looking away. "I've been on my own too long to just hand it over." Sophia reached across the table, gently placing her hand over his. "David, you don't have to be alone anymore. Let me help you. Let me fight this with you." David felt his resolve waver. The warmth of her hand, the sincerity in her eyes, made him rethink everything. Maybe it wasn't just about the business anymore. Maybe it was about more than just pride. "Okay," David said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, but I want to do it my way. I want to keep the integrity of this place. I don't want to compromise what I've built." Sophia smiled, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "You won't have to. We'll do this together, and we'll make sure Benson knows that he can't just take what isn't his." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Sophia's network proved to be invaluable. She used her connections to rally support from other small businesses in the area who were also threatened by Benson Motors' expansion. Together, they formed an alliance, pushing back against Graham's attempts to buy them out. David watched in awe as Sophia navigated the high-stakes world of business with ease. She was brilliant, a master strategist, and he found himself relying on her more and more. But even with Sophia's help, things weren't easy. Benson Motors had money, power, and influence. They had the resources to crush David and his friends in an instant, and Graham wasn't about to let David walk away without a fight. One night, after a particularly brutal meeting with Benson, David found himself in the garage, staring at the workbench, lost in thought. The weight of it all was crushing him. Could he really win this battle? He was jolted from his thoughts when the sound of the garage door opening echoed through the space. Sophia walked in, her expression stern. "You look like you've seen better days," she said, her voice light but with a hint of concern. David chuckled weakly. "Yeah, well, it's been a hell of a ride." Sophia walked over, standing beside him. "We're going to win this. You're going to win this." David turned to face her. "How can you be so sure?" Sophia smiled, her confidence unwavering. "Because I believe in you, and I know Benson can't beat us. He may have money, but he doesn't have what you have. You have heart and a real business." David looked into her eyes, the weight of the situation beginning to lift. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next few days would be crucial. Benson Motors had scheduled one final meeting with David this time. Graham was bringing in an army of lawyers and corporate sharks to finish the deal. But David had something even more powerful on his side: Sophia and the people who believed in him. The day of the final meeting arrived, and David walked into the conference room, his back straight, his heart pounding but resolute. Sophia stood beside him, her presence a quiet strength. Across the table, Graham Benson sat with his usual smug expression, flanked by his legal team. David's mind raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading, but also the moment he knew he had to face head-on. Graham leaned forward, his steely eyes locked onto David's. "I see you've decided to fight this, David. It's a shame. You know I can buy you out for a fair price, don't you?" David's grip tightened around the table. "I'm not selling, Graham. Not now, not ever. You can't buy what's mine." Sophia stepped forward, her voice confident. "And if you try, we'll make sure the public knows exactly how you've been operating." Graham's eyes flickered, a trace of uncertainty crossing his face, but he quickly masked it with a cold smile. "We'll see about that." The battle was intense, but in the end, David and Sophia emerged victorious. Graham's attempt to bulldoze them had failed. The community rallied behind David, and Benson Motors was forced to back off. David's garage was his to keep. In the weeks that followed, business boomed. David expanded, Emma and Lily flourished in their new, stable life, and Sophia became a permanent part of their world. She wasn't just a business partner anymore. She was family. And as David stood in the garage, looking at the bustling shop full of cars, he knew one thing for certain. He had finally found what he had been searching for: not just success, but love, trust, and the courage to fight for what mattered most. David smiled, his heart lighter than it had ever been. The future was his, and it was bright. Months passed since David and Sophia fought off Benson Motors. Their victory wasn't just a personal one. It had ripple effects throughout the local business community. Smaller businesses, once too intimidated by Benson's influence, now felt empowered to push back against corporate giants trying to bully them into submission. Word spread, and David's garage became a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who had long felt powerless in the face of corporate greed. David stood at the edge of his shop one evening, watching as his daughters played near the small playground in the back. The garage, once just a small, struggling operation, had grown into something much larger. He had expanded his team, hired skilled mechanics, and brought in new clients. The community was behind him, and his reputation had spread far beyond the local area. "Hey, you're smiling," Sophia said, walking up beside him, a soft smile on her face. "That's the first time I've seen you relax in months." David chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "It feels good to finally not have to fight every day just to stay afloat." Sophia looked at him with affection. "You've come a long way, but I think it's more than just business. You've really found your place here. This is your home, your legacy. You're doing it for your girls." David nodded, his heart swelling with pride as he watched Emma and Lily run across the yard, laughing. "It's not just about the business anymore. It's about building something that will last for them. I want them to know that anything is possible if you work hard enough." Sophia stood in silence for a moment, and then, her voice gentle but firm, she said, "I don't think it's just about the work either, David. It's about who you are. You've built something real here, something that can't be bought, no matter how much money they throw at you." David turned to look at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "I know, and I wouldn't be here without you. I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done." Sophia smiled, her eyes glinting with sincerity. "You don't need to repay me. You've already done it. You've shown me what it means to really care about something. I've always focused on power and money, but you've shown me that there's more to life than that." David smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. For the first time in his life, he realized that he wasn't just surviving. He was living, truly living. And it wasn't just the garage, it was the people around him. His daughters, Sophia, his friends, and even his neighbors. He had finally built a life, not just a business. Just as things seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm, Graham Benson reappeared in David's life. It was a crisp autumn morning when David received an unexpected phone call from a number he didn't recognize. He picked up, already bracing himself for another round of pressure. "David, it's Graham Benson." David felt a familiar tension build in his chest. "What do you want, Benson?" "I'd like to propose a meeting." Graham's voice was cold, calculated. "I've come to respect your business, David. I think we can work together." David's mind raced. Benson, the man who had tried to crush everything David had built, now wanted to collaborate? "Not interested," David replied firmly, about to hang up. "Wait," Graham interjected quickly, his tone shifting, becoming more diplomatic. "Let me explain. I've been thinking a lot about how things went down last time, and I see the potential in your business. We could be partners." David froze. "Partners?" he repeated, incredulous. "After everything?" "Yes," Graham said, his voice smoother now, almost soothing. "I realize I could have handled things better, but I think we could make a lot of money working together. Let's sit down, talk it out, no pressure." David knew this wasn't just an innocent offer. Benson wasn't someone who simply made peace, he was calculating, always looking for an angle. But could he afford to turn him down? He had worked so hard to get here, and the idea of joining forces with someone like Benson seemed dangerous, but the possibilities were also tempting. A week later, David found himself standing outside a sleek corporate building downtown, a place he had never set foot in before. Sophia was with him, of course, supporting him as she always did. They had agreed to meet Benson at his office. David wasn't thrilled about it, but he knew this might be their only chance to see what Benson was really after. When they entered the office, the contrast between David's humble garage and the polished, high-rise world of Benson Motors hit him like a cold wave. The walls were lined with glass, and the view from the top floor was breathtaking. But all David could focus on was Benson, sitting behind a massive desk, his fingers steepled together in front of him. "David," Benson said, offering a forced smile. "Sophia, thank you for coming." David nodded, his expression neutral, as he took a seat across from Benson. "Let's get straight to it. Why are you here?" Benson leaned forward, his eyes glinting with an unreadable expression. "I've been thinking about how things went wrong between us. I was too aggressive, too dismissive of your ability to succeed on your own. But I've come to realize something. You're not just some small-time mechanic. You've built something impressive, something I want to be a part of." David's instincts told him to be wary. There was something off about Benson's tone. "What exactly are you offering?" "I'm offering a partnership," Benson said, his words deliberate. "We combine your hands on expertise with my resources and network. Together, we could dominate this market. I'm talking about national expansion, new locations, and a larger customer base. Think about it, David. You can't do it alone forever." Sophia remained silent beside David, her gaze fixed on Benson, her mind clearly working through the implications of his words. She leaned forward slightly and spoke, her voice calm but firm. "We've already built something here, Graham. We're not looking to sell out. David's worked hard for everything he's achieved. He doesn't need you to make him bigger." Benson smiled, but there was a coldness to it. "Sophia, you're looking at this all wrong. This isn't about selling out. It's about expanding, growing. David can have the resources he's always wanted without compromising his integrity." David felt his pulse quicken. He had worked too hard to let this man take control of his dream. But the idea of expansion, of taking his business to the next level, was tantalizing. He glanced at Sophia, her eyes steady, urging him to think carefully. "I'm not interested in your offer," David finally said, his voice firm. "I've built this from the ground up, and I'm not going to hand it over to you." Graham's smile faltered, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of genuine frustration. "That's your decision, then," Benson said coldly, leaning back in his chair. "But mark my words, David, you'll regret turning me down." David stood up, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Maybe, but I'd rather take my chances on my own than sell out to someone like you." He turned to Sophia, his face resolute. "Let's go." As they walked out of the office, David's heart raced. He had turned down Benson's offer, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was far from over. Despite Benson's threats, David and Sophia continued to push forward, refusing to let anyone dictate their future. They focused on building relationships with clients, expanding David's network, and growing the garage into a true community hub. David realized that his success didn't have to be defined by what others expected of him. It was about his vision and his values. As months went by, Benson Motors gradually faded into the background, no longer a constant threat. David's garage flourished, becoming a local staple, and he found new opportunities to expand on his own terms. With Sophia by his side, David not only found business success but also the personal peace he had longed for. He had built something that was his, something that could provide for his daughters and leave a lasting legacy for generations to come. And as he stood in the garage, watching Emma and Lily play and laugh, he knew that this life was everything he had ever wanted. As the seasons changed, so did David's life. His garage was no longer just a small business, it had grown into a cornerstone of the community. Word of his integrity, his dedication, and his ability to rise above adversity spread far and wide. People came to him not just for his skills, but for his honesty. The small-town mechanic had become a symbol of resilience. Sophia had stayed by his side through it all. Together, they had weathered the storm, not just of Benson's attempts to buy him out, but of every obstacle that came their way. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about their partnership, their friendship, and the quiet love that had blossomed between them. They had built something far greater than a business, they had built a life. One evening, as David watched his daughters laugh together in the yard, their voices mingling with the sound of tools in the garage, he realized how far they had come. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, with his family, his friends, and his business. David looked at Sophia, who was standing beside him, watching the same scene. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia smiled, her eyes warm. "No, David, you did it, and I'm so proud of you." David grinned, feeling a surge of gratitude. "We did it together." And in that moment, David knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would always have what mattered most: his family, his values, and a future built on hard work, integrity, and love. The past was behind him, but the future was wide open, full of promise, full of hope, and with Sophia by his side, he knew that anything was possible.